Hello there and welcome to the Newsweek's starter edition of News Express right here on Africa Business Radio. Of course, exclusively brought to you by Business AM, Nigeria's fastest growing financial and business newspaper. Now let's see what the pages have to say today. Of course, top in the front page, we have Rivers woos industrial off-takers to his gas master plan, and just below that, Shell Gas CHGC early franchises, 50 million standard cubic feet per day, 17-kilometer pipeline runway by CHGC to increase to 100 million standard cubic feet per day. And away from that particular headline there, still on the front page, economy faces uncertainty in aftermath of end SARS. Cloud hangs over investment environment. Economy faces possible downgrades. Insurers continue stock taking. Economy lost over 58 billion naira daily to protest, and then crisis may roll back progress already made. If you move over to the summary section of the paper, this first one here is coming from the IMF. Africa's difficult road to recovery. That one is on page 2. And sitting on page 11, analysts wait in on a Greek spending. That one's on the finance and investment section. Pick it up on page 11. And in the technology and innovation section, that's on page 30. Music streaming booms in Nigeria. Now let's get into our conversation this morning with the publisher, Business AM, who will be joining us via telephone, Mr. Philip Isakwa. Good morning and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Right. Now, it was quite a week last week, of course, after a peaceful protest that was met with brutal force in what some are already calling the Lekki Tollgate massacre. Of course, this, stalled economic activities in the commercial capital. Now, Mr. Philip, how bad is it looking at this point?
Well, the thing with situations like this is that the outcomes usually come. You will begin to hear stories about outcomes much later. Now, what you have immediately is that the activities such as the arson that took place, the destruction of some businesses, will immediately have an impact. If you go to the Lekki corridor, for instance, where you had a lot of activities that led to the burning down of some shops and some malls, you find that those are completely shut down. But you need to look at it in terms of the global impact that this will have on the Nigerian economy. First of all, recall that we were going into COVID-19, we were already experiencing difficulties. Government was challenged by the reduction in revenues, was challenged by an economy that was contracting and almost going into recession. I mean, people are already waiting to hear the outcome of the third quarter GDP numbers, and there's talk that recession will have set in. So you had that going into COVID-19, and then you had COVID-19 come in, which grounded a number of activities in terms of the lockdown, and then you had these EndSARS activities, which started very well as a peaceful demonstration by youths protesting against police brutality. But then you had the outcome that followed the reaction, by what is now called the Lekki Tollgate massacre, and then all hell broke loose. Now, what you will find is that, first of all, insurance companies that we spoke to for our stories are saying that the losses are still being counted. They will wait for the companies and individuals affected to turn in their claims numbers, and then that we will then begin to see what's called in terms of figures, what that will mean for the insurance industry and the reinsurance industry. But beyond that is that you have a troubled economy, or you had a troubled economy going into this. What this has meant, or what this will mean, is that the economy has become more challenged, more troubled by the action. So when we say cloud hangs over investment environment. Of course you have that. Investment will be in two forms: local investors and international investors. First of all, international investors are always looking at political economic risk.
Exactly.
Doing their political economic risk analysis. Once it doesn't favor them, they will hold back. We have had situations, for instance, in the oil industry, where international oil companies have pulled back just because government has not been able to give a clear statement regarding the PIB. So with this happening, you have international investors looking, wait a minute, what's going to happen next? Is NSAS going to come back again? Or, how long will the protest continue? Local investors who have lost a lot of money, especially those who were directly impacted by the activities that took place last week, will first of all be trying to recoup their losses. A lot of them who have borrowed money to invest in those businesses, will be struggling very hard. Again, in some crimes, we're looking at what kind of suicide rate might happen, which is something that government will need to also begin to look at, to avoid suicide. We understand that a bank is already guaranteeing some 50 billion naira in terms of interest-free loans, and then the Lagos State government has put up something. So hopefully that will take care of a number of people affected by this and provide some respite. But you will find that another thing is that the credit rating agencies who have, we're talking about last time where there was, I think, a stable or a little downgrade, by the international rating agencies. So we will be expecting to see how this will impact on the next ratings that will come out from the international rating agencies. And you know that a lot of investors globally, look at these ratings, to make informed judgment in terms of what they put into an economy and so on and so forth. Analysts are really concerned, how this will play out. Nobody's sure, in terms of how eventually, the economy will be impacted. But be sure that there will be some negativity, in terms of how the economy is impacted by those who view the economy as a place to put their money. So you expect a lot in that regard.
Now, speaking of investment, let's turn our attention to page 4 of Business AM, talking about the MIIA headline now. That's the Millennium Impact for Infrastructure, which is about to be launched. Of course, we know that it is to spur and attract impact investment in Africa by developing bankable infrastructure deals. What more can you tell us about MIIA?
What I can tell you from that story is that, infrastructure is a key part of investment needs for Africa, not just this body, Africa 50, working with the US government to try to see how they can channel more funding to infrastructure development, but you can look back at the Africa Development Bank, AFDB, that is also working tirelessly to see that infrastructure deficit is reduced. Now, but there's a particular aspect of it, which is the word impact in investing. Now, when they talk about impact investing, they talk about investment that is given, that goes into what will impact lives of people. So you talk about education, you talk about health, you talk about transportation. The infrastructure deficit in Africa is huge. We're looking at $170 billion, a gap of $108 billion, that they've always spoken about. Now, for that to happen, you would need investment to come from all over the world, and because Africa doesn't have the capacity to aggregate that kind of investment internally, it has to look elsewhere. So what this arrangement is doing is for the U.S. government working with Africa 50, to ensure that there's a proper channel, for bringing in this investment. And this investment, they believe, will go a long way, in terms of the impact it will have on the societies in Africa, across the entire continent. So they look at transportation, for instance, they look at education, they look at health. COVID-19 has demonstrated, quite clearly the deficiencies that we have across the continent in terms of healthcare facilities. So you will need a lot of money to go into healthcare. Education is still an area. Transportation is an area. In Nigeria, for instance, we've talked about a lot of the build railways and the rest of it. Nigeria is beginning to talk about how it can ramp up its rail network, and we know that rail is very crucial, very, very important, in any economy, especially an economy like Nigeria's with a lot of population, So this is a welcome development. This is something that will put together properly, will be able to attract investors, to look at a proper channel through which they can put their money in infrastructural development, especially those with great impact on the continent.
Right. Now in just a minute, please, take the readers through developing stories to follow this week.
This week, you'll be looking at the settling how, for instance, those who have a number of banks that were affected by the NSAS situation or the riots that followed the NSAS activities. Now, how quickly will those banks come back, to life, especially across the weekend? You had a lot of banks that had their ATMs shut, because I think there must have been a switch off, of a lot of ATMs across the country. And then you had the POS agents, who now came on board and are charging the people for cashback services. So you have a lot of that. We're looking at, for instance, the Rivers State story. What Rivers is saying is that it's looking for investors to come in. It has established what it calls gas master plan, and we'll be looking at how investors will take that on. How do investors see that? There's a big interview in there, with the Commissioner for Energy, who has spoken a lot about what they are doing and how they are trying to ramp up gas investments, within River State. And that's what you will expect from across the country, state by state, developing the economy in such a way that investors will be looking into them. So that will be, I guess, internationally, you want to look at what will happen with the oil sector, the global oil prices, global demand and supply situation, and how that will affect Nigerian economy.
All right, Mr. Philip, we'll draw the curtain here. Of course, we'll get back to you, get in touch with you later in the week for more on the headlines. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Mr. Philip Isakwa is the publisher, Business AM, Nigeria's fastest growing financial and business newspaper.